I think Auburn fans are hopeful. I think Tennessee fans are spiteful and they hate Alabama so much. But I think Georgia has this unique amount of confidence and fearlessness when they're going into a game against Alabama.
They bark at people.
Hey, welcome back to Beat Everyone, Alabama football podcast from AL.com. I am Ben Flanagan. We're back for yet another edition of our series, Alabama football's 15 best games of the 21st century. And we're running out of games now. We're counting down from 15 to 1, and we're down to number 5 now. So like, it's elite territory in terms of what we consider the best games from the last 25 years from Alabama football. And our pick for the 5th best game in Alabama football history in the last 25 years, I should say, is another SEC championship game. This time, Alabama versus Georgia in 2012. And helping me to do this today, as always, our good friend, Beat Everyone producer, Matt Scalici. This is a good one, Matt.
This is a classic. This is, when we've talked a couple of times about SEC championship games in this series and how great the atmosphere always is at those games, and particularly in the old Georgia Dome. And this is as good as it's ever gotten to me. I would say this is the best college football atmosphere I have ever seen in person.
Wow. So you get to tell us, like, boots on the ground, what it was like. I was not there. I had to watch it on TV, which was great. It was like one of the best pieces of entertainment that I watched in 2012, to say the least. But Matt, this was Saturday, December 1st, 2012, the SEC title game in the Georgia Dome. Again, a 3 p.m. kick. As usual, CBS broadcast the game. Vern Lindquist, Gary Danielson on the call with Tracy Wolfson on the sideline. So this is Alabama, Georgia, Matt. Like, they've played 74 times now. Alabama leads the series 44-26. There are 4 ties between them. They've met in the SEC championship game 4 times, with Alabama winning each of those, and they're split in national championship matchups. So, Matt, Georgia may come up again in this series. I'll just say that. But I guess we could do this now. What are your thoughts on the Alabama-Georgia football rivalry?
I think it's great, and it really wasn't a thing my whole life. I just don't think there were individually very good games in this series, going way back, but I don't think anybody would have considered it a rivalry until, arguably not until Kirby Smart got there, because it was so one-sided during the Mark Richt Saban crossover era. But I think there were still great. What was interesting about it is that Georgia has always come along on Alabama's schedule at some very important times, particularly during the Saban era, and so far during the DeBoer era too. It's Some of it is because they're a relevant program, and of course it's just an automatically big deal to see these two teams play. But I just always feel like the timing is very fortuitous for Alabama. It happens at these moments where Alabama hasn't quite convinced everyone yet, where Georgia becomes this sort of ultimate test to prove if Alabama's the real deal that season. And, for the most part, Alabama has come out on top of a lot of those, but it's very interesting that it always seems to be kind of a turning point in the season for Alabama whenever they play Georgia. And even whether it's SEC championship games or regular season. And 2012, I think, was a hugely important one, because the way this season had lined up, Notre Dame was in the national championship game. There was no question about it. They were undefeated. They had a ton of hype around them. And the belief pretty much across the board going into this game was whoever wins this game is going to play Notre Dame in the national championship game. There really wasn't any doubt about it. And so it was one of those weird moments in the BCS era where we sort of had a de facto playoff game.
Yeah, I think the way I look at Georgia in this rivalry, if I'm strictly speaking, like from the Alabama point of view, is that they were always, even when Alabama got the best of them, and ultimately they did, and Nick Saban, I think, was 8-2 against them in his time as the Alabama coach. Georgia was always a worthy adversary, right? Like if you go back and watch James Bond movies. Like, how many James Bond movies are there? Like 25 plus, whatever it is.
Right.
Some villains are better than others, right? Like, some of them are downright terrible, but some of them are like the classic, like on the short list of best adversaries for James Bond. Georgia was up there. They're top tier, great opponent. Usually they're going to, as you said, test their mettle in ways that Alabama isn't used to. And they have to get through each other. But in order for Alabama to win that next national championship or win that next SEC championship, they're going to have to get past Georgia, who are ready for Alabama. And that wasn't always the case. There would be these games when Alabama would blow out Missouri. They would blow out Florida eventually. They would blow out whoever was in front of them and then march their way towards it. But Georgia, there were some blowouts between the two of them, but for the most part, they just had these knockdown, drag out fights that were incredibly compelling and entertaining for fans of college football. But it really defined not only Alabama, but SEC and college football that year. This was the best the sport had to offer. And it was cool to have a front row seat. And in your case, to be in the building to watch it unfold in front of you.
I
So
there is a specific play that we will talk about later, and I will mention I had an even more than usual front row seat to during this game.
So this was Nick Saban's sixth season as the Alabama head coach. They're coming off the 2011 national title season. They lost to LSU in the game of the century. After some BCS chaos, thankfully, they get the rematch. They beat LSU in the title game. A.J. McCarron is back in his second year as the starting quarterback. They have a new offensive coordinator in Doug Nussmeier. It's the kind of end of this is a big turning point game. I think that a lot of college football fans and really Alabama fans cherish for reasons that we'll get into, because college football would change the very next year. Really, it had already started to by 2012, but it's kind of the end of an era at running back for Alabama, because you had this cycle of Mark Ingram and Trent Richardson, and it was officially over. So now it's Eddie Lacy's turn. He's now backed up by freshman phenom TJ Yeldon. And I feel like we can get into the TJ Yeldon backstory later in the series, Matt, but let's quickly touch on Eddie Lacy, right? Like, he was obviously a talented recruit. Otherwise, he wouldn't have signed with Alabama, but he didn't have the same hype as Richardson or even as TJ Yeldon, his backup this year. But, Saban valued experience, and he would often roll with the veteran in circumstances like this. We'll have a lot to say about Eddie Lacy during this episode. But Matt, what's top of mind when you think about Eddie Lacy's time at Alabama, especially when he finally got the nod to be the guy in 2012?
As hard as it is to believe, Eddie Lacy's a little bit of a victim of he was kind of in that first generation of Nick Saban recruits at Alabama where fans stopped worrying about recruiting and thus stopped paying as close attention. So, Trent Richardson came around at a time when I think even beyond the sort of hardcore fan was starting to really pay attention to recruiting at Alabama because they were doing so incredibly well and they were bringing in all these superstars. But Eddie Lacy was very highly regarded as a high school prospect. And also, on top of it, it was one of those that fans always love and that Nick Saban always loved, which is a stolen Louisiana recruit, stolen right out from under LSU. And, Lacy, I think, had in a lot of ways, he was very different from what had come before him at Alabama, but I think he sort of set the template for some guys that would come after him. In particular, I think you can look at Derrick Henry in some ways and Najee Harris as well. A very physical, big back who wasn't really giving up much in terms of speed and agility either. But that size, you hadn't really seen that before. And like typically in college football, historically, running backs are not huge guys. But Lacey's a big dude. He in fact got bigger in the NFL, and it maybe slowed him down a little bit. But he was very difficult to bring down, a punishing uh, runner. To put contact on Eddie Lacy is a business decision for a defensive player.
I loved Eddie Lacy. I mean, we had the conversation on the podcast several episodes ago about who do we give the ball to on 4th and 1 if we could have a first choice, right? Sort of like a little mini draft of who that would be. And Eddie Lacy was my pick.
I think this is the game. I think this is the game
Yeah.
that kind of subconsciously puts that idea in all of our minds about Eddie Lacy.
Yeah, it's certainly an Eddie Lacy game that a lot of people remember that way, and rightly so. And we'll talk about why. So, Matt, under head coach Mark Richt, Georgia has had this reputation as very good, but not quite great or championship caliber. It was often close, but no cigar, or always a bridesmaid, right, for them during the BCS era. But in 2012, they put it all together. Aaron Murray was an outstanding quarterback. They had a phenomenal running back in Todd Gurley, plus a really talented backup in Keith Marshall, weapons at wide receiver like Malcolm Mitchell, and just all these really scary, just like stud defensive players like Jarvis Jones, Alec Ogletree, Bakari Rambo. They got blown out, strangely enough, by a top 10 ranked South Carolina during the regular season, but they finished 11-1, and they appeared to have enough to not only take on Alabama, but to win a national championship. Presumptively, the national champions if and when they beat Alabama in this game, because, I mean, most people thought in retrospect that they would have had a similar result against Notre Dame. But, Matt, how do you remember this version of Georgia before the Kirby Smart era really cemented them as one of the best programs in college football?
Well, they were always great at recruiting. They always had really, I think, comparable talent to anybody in the SEC and in all of college football. Mark Richt was a very strong recruiter. He also had a lot of really good assistant coaches working for him at any given time. I mean, a lot of the guys that worked for Mark Richt are still out there in college football and considered to be, some of the best assistant coaches in the game today. And I think Rick, look, the joke always for people who spend too much time on the internet, the joke was that Mark Rick had lost control of the program, right? So the stereotype was, that for all the things he did right, he never seemed to have the sort of command over every aspect of the program, particularly discipline, that Nick Saban had with his guys. I think that's an unfair characterization, and I think the thing that has most sort of vindicated Mark Richt in that area is the fact that if you look at Georgia under Kirby Smart, who is a guy that I don't think anybody has any questions about his coaching ability or his understanding of how to run a program, Georgia continues to have big off-field issues pretty frequently. I would say, number one, that's just a normal thing for most college-age kids, and number two, it's probably a sign that the issue has a lot more to do with Athens, Georgia, than it does with whoever's in charge of the college football program. But all that said, I mean, I think Mark Richt was remarkably consistent. I think you look around at the amount of turnover that was happening in the SEC during this period, and a lot of that was brought on by Saban and his success, and it made everybody raise their standards. But Georgia never really the dips were not as low. Their floor was never as low as a lot of the other big programs in the SEC during this time. And Mark Richt, I think, showed remarkable consistency, even though I never really got all the way. But I think they were always a threat. I think they were always very good, and they showed themselves. I totally think if they get through this game, I think they handle Notre Dame in that national title game.
I agree. Alabama is also 11-1 during the season. Their lone loss thanks to Johnny Manziel in the Texas A&M game just 3 weeks prior to this game, which is nuts. And once again, the stars align. There's more BCS chaos. Alabama blows out Western Carolina, then Auburn both of those games 49-0. They keep their resume intact so that all they really need is a win over Georgia, and they're in the BCS title game to face undefeated Notre Dame. Alabama's ranked number 2. Georgia is number 3. Matt, you were in the building for this. I've been to Atlanta for some Alabama-Georgia games, and it's an interesting atmosphere. Did you feel like when you went to Alabama-Georgia games in the Georgia Dome or Mercedes-Benz Stadium, did you ever feel like there were virtual home games for Georgia, or was it a fairly even split?
No, I don't think it was ever that way, actually. And it might be in different matchups, but Atlanta is a 2-hour drive from Birmingham. I think for most Alabama fans, that's a day trip. I don't think Alabama fans consider that to be too far away. To me, my memory of this game and of any Alabama Georgia game I've seen in that building was very close to 50-50 crowds. Um, I think that that's part of what made it so spectacular and why it was so loud is no matter the result of any play in these games, it is loud at the end of the play. It is a huge psychological mind game to get your head around that it doesn't I mean, I think that you'll hear some players talk about how they love to play on the road, right? Because they love silencing the other crowd and they love to sort of feel that hatred, that energy towards them. It's constantly back and forth in a game like this, and it's especially this particular game because there's so many lead changes and because it never really seems out of reach for anybody. It's such a strange environment, and I think what it does is it kind of like puts your nerves on edge the whole game. It never feels like it's calming down.
On that note, Matt, what are your thoughts on Georgia fans? Before Kirby Smart finally got Georgia back over the finish line, I would often hear them described as a fan base who had Alabama's confidence and Ole Miss's trophy case. And these are adults who bark at people. They wear spiky shoulder pads and they paint their faces. They get into it. They're rabid fans, but Matt, at the risk of offending more people on this show,
I have Georgia fans in my family, I will say.
Okay, I was going to say, thoughts
Yeah.
on the Georgia fan base.
So I actually think that a big part of the character of this rivalry is due to the specific, let's call them eccentricities of the Georgia fan base. I think that when I talked about how these matchups always feel like they're going to be important, I think a big part of that is that Georgia is one of the few SEC fan bases that goes into every game with Alabama, no matter what the circumstances are, thinking we're obviously going to beat Alabama. They're 100% confident that they're going to win. And so there's this level, as you mentioned, there's a bit of arrogance involved there, and some would say unearned arrogance, but also that is a psychological component. I think it makes the game feel big. It also makes it feel more uh, disappointing when things don't go well for them in the game. And I'll go back and look at 2008 and 2015 is another one that kind of played out that way where, I mean, I think the Georgia fan base went into those games feeling so good about the team and feeling so confident that they were going to pull off a big win in those games. And when they get the win knocked out of them at a certain point, I mean, the imagery on television is really unique in those situations because you have these fans who have hyped themselves into this sort of fever pitch and they can't believe what's happening. They can't believe it's not going their way. So I think that that's a big part of the intensity of this particular rivalry is, I think Auburn fans are hopeful. I think Tennessee fans are spiteful and they hate Alabama so much. But I think Georgia has this unique amount of confidence and fearlessness when they're going into a game against Alabama.
They bark at people.
Once again, the stakes could not be higher. This is a playoff before the actual playoff that would come 2 years later was implemented. Winner goes to the BCS championship game. Plain and simple. Stakes are there. Matt, before kickoff, Vern and Gary set the stage. They point out how similarly built Alabama and Georgia are. Gary says they're built on toughness, defense, strong running backs. They've got good quarterbacks. This is one season before Gus Malzahn takes over at Auburn, two before Nick Saban hires Lane Kiffin. Oregon is very competitive. Other programs are adopting spread offenses. Matt, I mentioned this game being kind of like a sea change and kind of symbolic. This feels more nostalgic for those of us who really love that sort of smash mouth, run the damn ball, joyless Murderball era of not just Alabama, but really college football, like what it took to be successful at this level. Do you think that this felt like a bit of a swan song for that style of play?
That's an interesting. I mean, it really is right on the precipice of. You look at the next year, and the the two teams that end up in the national championship game are a. I think a pretty multiple offense from Florida State, but certainly very reliant on a passing game at Florida State, and then Gus Malzahn with a hurry up no huddle, which obviously caused a sort of full on revolution in college football for a few years, including at Alabama. I do think that this 2012 season I don't want to say, I mean, look, these things kind of come and go, but I think this 2012 season, it's interesting that the three teams that we see at the end of the year are all of that sort of same ilk. And actually, Notre Dame is a bit more of an outlier because I think at the time Brian Kelly was trying to run a bit more of a pass heavy offense. I wouldn't quite call it spread, but it was definitely more pass oriented than what Alabama and Georgia were doing, but they were still a very physical team. They were built for this kind of matchup, just not built well enough. But yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting to look at the sort of commonalities of the teams that end up in the mix at the end.
Yeah, so look, here's what Nick Saban told Tracy Wolfson moments before kickoff, and she asked him, "What do you tell your team before a game like this?" He says, "Quote: They've got to have the discipline to execute the plan, but we've also got to play with a relentless competitive attitude for 60 minutes in the game. It'll be like two heavyweight fighters for 15 rounds, and whoever can do that the best is going to have the best chance to be successful." End quote. So he's right. It's a slugfest. There's no other way to describe it. It's a prize fight. These teams go punch for punch, round for round. Alabama's wearing the road whites. They get the ball first. They punt after 5 plays. Georgia goes 3 and out. Then they punt. Alabama starts a drive, but then Jarvis Jones sacks A.J. McCarron. He fumbles it away. Georgia misses a field goal. Alabama punts again. So the first quarter is scoreless. The defenses show up. Matt, a bit of a digression here. We'll get back to the game in a second. But at various points of a Georgia game that broadcasts on television, including this one, they will often cut to UGA, the Georgia mascot. He's obviously a real bulldog.
Yes.
Usually just sitting there, breathing heavily, sometimes resting on ice packs and shade. Matt, what do you think of live mascots like UGA, Bevo, Smokey, Mike the Tiger? Any thoughts?
I mean, I don't want to sound like a card carrying member of PETA, but I do wonder whether the animals actually enjoy that at all. I mean, I guess it's cool to see in person. I'll say this: I think it's fine for dogs. That's probably the only animal that I'm okay with being in this scenario because dogs don't mind being around people for the most part. Like as long as they are keeping the dog comfortable, I think that's fine. I don't know that we should have cows, tigers, buffaloes. I think maybe
Elephants?
that's going. I'm definitely look.
Are you anti bringing
if you're
elephant
one of the
to
Bama fans
campus?
that still thinks having a live elephant mascot is a good idea, go to YouTube and search elephant tramples funeral.
Good Lord, Matt.
Are you aware of this story that The
No.
elephant that killed somebody and then it showed up to that person's funeral to stomp
No.
again.
No.
They are terrifying and they're mean. They almost took down the Roman Empire. We do not need to have elephants at a football game.
Hot take, Matt.
Yeah.
Okay, so thanks for sharing that. So Georgia eventually draws first blood early in the second quarter when Murray finds Jay Rome for a touchdown. After a couple of punts and an A.J. McCarron interception, Alabama answers with an Eddie Lacy 41-yard touchdown, just rumbles down the field to even the score. And soon it really does become the Eddie Lacy game. And really both backs. Eddie Lacy has 20 carries for 181 yards. He has 2 touchdowns. TJ Yeldon has 25 carries for 153 yards and a touchdown. Matt, these two played their best in the biggest games. They won a national title together. Where does the Lacy Yeldon backfield rank among Alabama's all-time best?
Boy, it's interesting to ask that in the context of this game in particular, because this one is up there as one of the best games for a collective running back room, I think, that we've ever seen at Alabama. In terms of the full, the 1-2 punch being so potent in a game. I mean, this is unbelievable to watch these two guys back to back in tandem in this game. And the fact that one of them would come off the field and the other one would come on and look immediately devastating. It's I think the single biggest reason why Alabama ends up winning this game. But there are certainly eras where Alabama had a lot of talent in the backfield, and I would go back and look at sort of the end of that decade, 2018 or so, where you've got Najee Harris, Josh Jacobs, and Damian Harris all in the same running back room, plus probably a couple of other guys waiting their turn. Brian Robinson may have been on one of those rosters too, just kind of hanging out, hoping Alabama gets up 50 points so he can come in a little bit. But this is, just in terms of the top two guys, this is maybe the strongest individual game I can think of for Alabama running backs.
Yeah, it's like at their best in this game, you wouldn't rather have any other backfield than these guys. So with just over a minute left in the first half, Murray throws a pick to Clinton Dix. This is a big moment. During the return, Alabama defensive lineman Quentin Dial levels an unsuspecting Murray with a blindside block. There is no flag, but there is obviously an uproar on Twitter, on the broadcast. This probably gets called today, let's be honest. But, this becomes a meme that Alabama fans still use to this day. Vern gives us an, oh my gosh, wow. And Gary says it should have been flagged. Alabama gets a field goal. They take the 10-7 lead into halftime. During the halftime show, CBS anchor Tim Brando really harps on the Dial hit on Murray, even at one point suggesting that Dial could or should be suspended for the next game, the national title game, if Alabama wins. Matt, was
good
this,
old Tim Brando?
Was this a pal to incarnations of the show before?
Yeah,
but Matt, was this hit a what if, or was it just a footnote?
I think Bama fans remember it. I think Georgia fans remember it too. It's funny because he had a tremendous college career, overall. But Aaron Murray, in terms of like Georgia's sort of biggest moments while he was there, he really ended up on the bad end of some tough plays. I know there's one for Auburn as well, that Auburn fans sort of really feel like they got one over on Aaron Murray as well. The guy, I think maybe that sort of speaks to possible pass protection issues for Georgia during this era. But Aaron Murray still had a great game in this game. He ends up with 265 yards passing, nothing to sneeze at. It's not totally, by today's standards, I don't think we would consider that a huge game, but I think in a game like this where both defenses are clearly loaded with NFL talent, um, that's a pretty impressive line for him. But yes, I mean the sort of textbook example of keep your head on a swivel, I think.
So here's where things get dark for Alabama. Georgia gets the ball first in the second half. They score on a Todd Gurley run. Alabama then puts together an 11-play drive, but they have to settle for a field goal attempt. Cade Foster's kick is blocked, and Alec Ogletree returns it 55 yards for a touchdown. Georgia leads 21-10 late in the third quarter. But Matt, with the exception of one game, pretty much the entire Saban era, if there's one thing you don't do, it's count his teams out. I mean, it's an underrated part of his in-game coaching prowess. Alabama makes adjustments and usually plays their way back into it despite any deficit. And behind a flurry of TJ Yeldon runs and a 1-yard touchdown and then a 2-point conversion from Yeldon, they pull within 3 going into the fourth quarter. They then force a Georgia 3-and-out, and then we get an Eddie Lacy touchdown after a 74-yard drive. And Matt, this is when both of these teams just buckle down, knuckle up, and we get what becomes an instant classic.
Yeah, it's I mean, I think that if I have to, I mean, it's so funny to look at the sort of play by play of this game and the stat lines and all of that and think, how did Alabama end up winning this game? Because and what it comes down to, I think, is it's extremely situational. Alabama gets good and hits another gear just when they need to. I think they are playing the long game against Georgia in this game. They are playing relatively safe in terms of the passing game early on. They don't put too much on AJ McCarron to try to win this game. They pound and pound and pound. And I think you can see as the game goes on, really, we see it towards the end of the first half that Alabama's running backs are starting to have more success and the offensive line is starting to open up more holes. But in the second half, even more so, Alabama starts to, they are essentially betting on we will last longer than these Georgia players. We are going to wear them out and we're going to be playing better football in the fourth quarter than they are. And that gamble pays off because I think you can start to see, I mean, that's what really shows up late in this game is Eddie Lacy and TJ Yeldon start looking better and better as the game goes on. And I think it has a lot to do with how much pressure and how much brutality the Alabama offensive line has been showing to the Georgia defense for this entire game up to that point.
Yeah, Georgia answers with another Todd Gurley touchdown, but there's obviously a lot of time left, and we're going to learn just how important the clock is later in the game. They trade a couple of punts, and then, Matt, I think we arrive at what we on this show call the kill shot. And look, while statistically this isn't A.J. McCarron's best game, but it's really moments like this where he really solidifies himself as a winner, as a quarterback who really did everything that they needed to win, a guy who could make any throw and did so in huge situations like these. And on a play action pass, he finds Amari Cooper for a 45-yard go-ahead touchdown, and Alabama does not relinquish the lead. At that point, Alabama actually forces another 3-and-out, and they have a chance to really officially close the book. But Georgia forces their own 3-and-out, and they get the ball back with a chance to win it. And with 1 minute and 8 seconds left, Georgia has no timeouts, and they must travel 85 yards to score a touchdown to win it because they're down by 4. And to Aaron Murray's credit, very good quarterback, they nearly pull it off. They make it to the 8-yard line. And with the clock running, it all comes down to one play. Murray hits a receiver who slips inbounds. They can't call a timeout. There's not enough time on the clock for another play. It runs out. Alabama wins 32-28. And Matt, we'll get to takeaways and MVP and stuff like that in a second, but it's kind of funny if you watch the very end of this game, the broadcast, it's you look back and you see this image of Kirby Smart and Alabama gets this big stop and he's literally jumping up and down, celebrating the stop and the win with his players. And it's against the team that he would coach to national titles in just a few years. And I'm just curious, Matt, what do you think Alabama fan, or how do you think Alabama fans view Kirby Smart right now? Because, he won 4 national titles with the team as the defensive coordinator, so many other accomplishments. He was such a vital part of the Saban era success. Then he goes to Georgia. He becomes a true rival to Saban and Alabama, becomes kind of a thorn in their side when it comes to recruiting and for a lot of other reasons. Do you think that fans tend to remember him fondly, or do you think they maybe consider him more of a villain now?
I think you're a fool if you don't remember Kirby Smart fondly, if you're an Alabama fan. I mean, I think you always tend to notice annoying facets of people when they're on the opposite sideline from you. But I mean, look, this guy is a huge, huge reason, second only to Nick Saban, as to why this program did what it did uh, over the last 2 decades. I think he clearly gave his all to the program while he was there, and that's a great example what you're pointing to, right? He's an alma mater. Georgia's his alma mater. He played there. He's got every reason in the world to care about the well-being of Georgia football, but he was all in for Alabama. He wanted national championships for Alabama. He wanted his guys to succeed. He put a ton of Alabama players into the NFL. I think he is often credited for being a great developer of talent, especially those guys in the secondary that he coached himself. I mean, just a hugely important person in the history of Alabama football. And I don't think he'll ever coach at Alabama again in any capacity, because I think he's probably at the last job he ever wants to be at. But I get that that's a complex thing, but like Kirby Smart, I mean, look, the other part of this is, even at Georgia, I mean, he's only beaten Alabama once, and I realize it was for a national championship, but like ultimately he owes Alabama a lot more defeats before he's even with the Crimson Tide as a head coach. So I don't know. I don't I hard for me to imagine anybody feeling like he's a villain to Alabama these days.
Quick answer here. When Nick Saban retired and before Alabama hired DeBoer, do you think Alabama called Kirby Smart?
I mean, I'd almost, if it cost you a quarter to call him, it was a waste of a quarter. But
Probably, probably. But I mean, he coached here for a long time. Do you think like you have to make that call, or do you just think like it would be a waste?
I don't think it's even worth it. I mean, I think it's so clear that he's at his ultimate destination. There's some other guys that maybe would have been worth a call even if they were going to say no, but Kirby in particular, I just think it's so clear that this is a union that's not going anywhere. I mean, things would have to turn so nasty for Kirby and Georgia to break up, and I just don't see that happening.
All right, Matt. Let's name the MVP. Who won the game?
My MVP, and I'm gonna cheat. I'm gonna say it is the two-headed running back beast of Eddie Lacy and TJ Yeldon. I think in particular, that AJ McCarron touchdown. I mentioned earlier. I had a very close POV of a key play in this game. If you actually go back and watch the TV broadcast of that play, I am in the end zone. I am on the side of the end zone that Amari Cooper catches that
Oh
pass
wow.
in. So it's happened right in front of me. But the play right before that, which I probably couldn't see very well at the time, but obviously have seen many times on video now, TJ Yeldon converting on a 3rd and 5, right around midfield. It is such a it is such a blow in every way to Georgia. It is a blow to their morale. I think it is a sign that they are not going to stop Alabama in this game. And it's such a tough run. I mean, it's not like they didn't get where they needed to get defensively. They are where they need to be, and TJ Yeldon simply, through sheer will and power, converts that first down, and you can feel it coming. This was sort of a classic Nick Saban move. Is you get that big tough third down, and you step right up and take your shot at the end zone. And that's exactly what they did. But that TJ Yeldon play was a backbreaker right before that.
I remember thinking that was such a strange call on 3rd and 5 with so much on the line. You're going to call a running play, but you got belief in that backfield and really that offensive line, arguably the best offensive line in Alabama history. I'm with you. I give it to Lacey and Yeldon. Again, to me, the 2012 team is the epitome of what people call joyless murder ball. Lacey, in particular, was in the mold of Mark Ingram and Derrick Henry, and then ultimately Najee Harris. But you just don't overthink it, right? Like, you just give that man the ball, and these two combined for 334 yards and 3 touchdowns. So that's a good
and
pick.
45 carries between them. And that is, you think about as a defense that you have to defend either Eddie Lacy or TJ Yeldon 45 times in that game. That is absolutely brutal. That is going up against Mike Tyson in his prime in the ring. And they wore out as the game went on. Understandably, it was a really tough matchup for anybody to try and stop.
All right, Matt, some takeaways. Alabama goes on to play Notre Dame in the BCS championship. We've covered it in this series. Go back and listen. They dominate. I think it might be the apex of the Nick Saban era in a lot of ways. This and the Notre Dame game really established Alabama as a full-on dynasty in college football. This is peak Nick Saban recruiting machine, on-field dominance, and it doesn't look like anything's going to change anytime soon. And even though there's again a bit about to be somewhat of a sea change in the way the game is played, but Saban takes note of this. He makes adjustments. He makes certain hires. He changes the coaching staff a little bit to keep Alabama competitive and dominant in the sport. We talked about the Georgia rivalry. This was his second win overall against Georgia. He lost his first game against them in 2007, beat them in the blackout game in Athens. He went 8-2 against Georgia, 2-1 against Mark Richt, beat them in 4 SEC title games. He split with them in the national title games. It's a pretty one-sided series. Georgia was always almost competitive when they matched up, but they rarely got over the hump. That said, these teams had some instant classics. Mark Richt never made it back to the SEC title game with Georgia. He left Georgia after 2015. He then went to Miami. Kirby comes in and obviously has more battles with Alabama. More on that in this series soon. This was Nick Saban's second SEC championship at Alabama, on his way to a 3rd national title. Eddie Lacy would leave for the NFL draft. This was arguably, again, I said, Alabama's best offensive line ever. Guys like Chance Warmack and Barrett Jones. Doug Nussmeier would get one more season as the OC before Nick Saban brings in Lane Kiffin. Matt, what did I leave out?
That sounds about right, Ben. I mean, this is, I think I have characterized. It's funny because earlier this week you had Kevin and Craig on talking about Bryant versus Saban. And one of the things they mentioned was Bryant having 2 separate dynasties. And even though Saban's are closer together, I view his tenure at Alabama in a similar way. I kind of think of them as separate dynasties. And I think this is the tail end of the first one, that was built on power and physicality and total recruiting dominance. And I think when you go to the second one, there's obviously no less of a emphasis on talent, but much more emphasis, I think, on offensive strategy, creativity in the offense, and particularly in the play calling under Kiffin and Sarkisian. I think this is the epitome, even more so than 2009 and 11. This is everything working correctly. The defense is elite. The offense is elite. They have so many different ways to beat you, and they always found a way to do it.
Well, that's number 5 on our list of Alabama football's 15 best games of the 21st century. We are moving through it. Join us next week for 2 more episodes of Beat Everyone, including the Wednesday episode when we hit number 4 on our list. You can find Beat Everyone on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. Go check it out, subscribe, rate us, leave a review. We really appreciate it when y'all do that. Matt Scalici, Beat Everyone producer. Thanks as always.
Thanks, Ben.
All right, I am Ben Flanagan with AL.com. We appreciate you for watching and listening, and we'll see you next time.